In a small town with around 2,400 people, a young woman lived a calm and simple life with her parents. Their daily routine was steady and peaceful. Her mother worked as an accountant at the local public hospital. Her father took care of a farm that was right next to their house. Since the farm was so close, he was almost always nearby, working in the fields just a few steps away from home. The young woman studied at a nearby college. The distance from college to her house was not very long, but she still had to walk along the two-lane road every day to get back home. She didn't mind the walk much. In fact, she often looked forward to it because she knew her mother would be cooking dinner. The smell of fresh, homemade food was always waiting for her. To save time, she often took a shortcut. This shortcut was a gravel path that went through a wooded area. It helped her reach home about 15 minutes faster. However, the path was not very safe or comforting. The houses along the way were far apart, and the trees were thick, making the area feel lonely and quiet. Her father had warned her many times not to use that path. He told her the woods could feel strange, especially when it started getting dark. But she didn't listen. She preferred saving time and getting home faster. Along this shortcut, there was an old house. It looked broken and forgotten. The walls were damaged, the windows were covered in dust, and the yard was full of junk and rusted items. It looked like no one had lived there for years. Every time she passed that house, she felt uncomfortable. To deal with the silence, she would hum or sing to herself. The sound of her own voice made her feel less alone. One afternoon, after finishing her classes, she noticed the sky changing. Dark clouds began to cover the sky, turning it a deep purple color. A storm was coming. The air felt heavy and the afternoon started to feel like evening. She didn't want to get caught in the rain, so she quickly decided to take the shortcut again. Even though it was getting darker, she thought it would help her reach home faster. Soon, heavy rain began to fall. Thunder roared loudly in the sky. The wind picked up, pushing against her as she walked. She lowered her head and started walking faster. As she moved deeper into the woods, the trees began to sway wildly in the wind. The branches moved in all directions, making the place feel even more frightening. For a moment, she thought about turning back and going toward the college again. But then she realized she had already come too far. It was shorter to keep going. So, she continued. When she reached near the end of the path, she came close to the old, broken house. By now, she was almost running. Her heart was beating fast, both from fear and from trying to escape the storm. As she passed the house, she suddenly felt the urge to look up. She glanced at one of the upper windows, and then she froze. There was something there. A dark shape stood behind the glass. It looked like a person, but what scared her the most were the eyes. Two faint red lights were staring directly at her. They were still, watching her. Her breath stopped for a moment. A cold feeling spread through her body, colder than the rain soaking her clothes. Without thinking, she turned and ran. She ran as fast as she could, not looking back even once. When she reached home, she pushed the door open and rushed inside. She was completely wet and shaking. Her father was already inside, having left the fields because of the storm. Her mother was in the kitchen, finishing dinner. She tried to speak, but struggled to catch her breath. Finally, she told them what she had seen. The dark figure and the glowing red eyes in the window. Her parents listened carefully. Her father was upset that she had taken the shortcut again, especially after he had warned her so many times. But when he saw how scared she was, his anger softened. He knew she wasn't lying. She had truly been frightened. A few days later, when the weather became normal again, her fear slowly turned into curiosity. Her father decided they should go together and check the house. So one day they walked down the gravel path toward the old house. When they reached it, they found something unexpected. The house was not empty. An elderly couple had been living there for many years. The woman had recently passed away, and her husband was very old and sick. He had been stuck in bed for weeks and was unable to take care of the house. That explained why the place looked so abandoned. Later, the young woman's mother learned more details from someone at the hospital who knew the old man. The man was grieving deeply after losing his wife. To remember her, he had made something special. He had placed a photo of his wife inside a frame and added small red LED lights around it. He kept this frame near the window. At night, the lights would glow. From outside, it looked like two red eyes in the darkness. Even after hearing this explanation, the young woman still felt uneasy. Something about the red lights and the way they appeared in the window stayed with her. She didn't want to think about it too much. From that day on, she never used the shortcut again. She decided that reaching home a little late was much better than feeling that kind of fear again. Her life slowly returned to normal. She continued going to college and walking home, but now she always took the longer road. The extra 15 minutes didn't bother her anymore. Sometimes she would think about the old man in the broken house. She imagined him sitting alone, surrounded by memories, with the soft red glow of the lights beside him. But she preferred to keep that world separate from hers. For her, home meant warmth, safety, and comfort. The smell of her mother's cooking and the sight of her father coming in from the fields were enough to make her feel at peace. As time passed, the seasons changed. In summer, thick leaves covered the view of the old house. In winter, it stood out clearly against the gray sky. To others in the town, it was just an old building. But to her, it was a reminder that something ordinary can suddenly feel strange and frightening. Eventually, she finished her studies and moved on to the next stage of her life. But she never forgot the lesson she had learned. She understood the value of safety and the importance of listening to advice from those who cared about her. The town continued its quiet and steady life, and the story of the red eyes remained only with her, a memory of fear that later made sense, but still felt unsettling. She found comfort in knowing that most mysteries in the world have simple explanations, even if they seem scary at first. Still, she always chose the safer path. And whenever she walked home, she stayed on the main road, far away from the silent woods and the glowing red eyes. I am currently in my final year of college, a time when most people are starting to find their own path. My situation is a bit more complicated, however, because of my parents. They are incredibly, almost suffocatingly protective. Growing up, I realized it wasn't just typical parental worry. It was because of how people reacted to my appearance. Everywhere I go, whether it is on campus or just walking down the street, I feel eyes on me. It doesn't matter if it is a girl my age, a man passing by, or even an older uncle at a shop. They all look at me like I am some kind of prize or a treat they've been waiting for. This constant, lingering attention has made my parents terrified for my safety. But I have grown to dislike the cage they've built around me. And to prove I could exist in the world without them, I took a part-time job. I started at a Target store, working the shift from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. The night of the incident was a Friday, and a heavy, relentless rain was lashing against the massive glass front of the store. The rhythmic drumming of the storm echoed through the high ceilings, making the store feel lonely and exposed. At 9 p.m., my female coworker finished her shift. She gave me a sympathetic look as she pulled on her raincoat. She left me alone at the front. At that point, a man around 25 years old came to the registers. He was the closing manager sent to help me manage the final hour, so we could lock up at 10 p.m. While he was heading toward the back, his phone began to vibrate. He answered it quickly, and I watched as his expression shifted from professional to pure panic. He stayed on the call for a minute, pacing and gesturing urgently as he spoke to someone about a crisis at his house. Once he hung up, he rushed over to me and placed the heavy store keys directly onto the table. He pointed emphatically at the cleaning checklist on the counter and told me that he had something important to do at his home. So today I had to finish the work and secure the entire building myself. With a final, apologetic nod, he grabbed his cap and bolted out the side door. The heavy click of the lock signaled his departure, leaving me entirely alone in the echoing silence of the massive store. Suddenly, the motion sensors chimed and a customer walked in. I looked up, expecting to offer a greeting, but felt immediate confusion. The man was soaked from the rain and had no cart or basket. He wore a thick, dark hoodie with the hood pulled low over his face, and his hands were shoved deep into his pockets. I said hello. He didn't look at me or say a word. He just started walking slowly through the aisles. He wasn't looking at the products. He was just scanning the building. He eventually circled back and walked back out into the downpour. I stood there for a moment, watching him through the glass. He didn't walk toward a car. He just crossed the wet pavement and vanished into the darkness. I felt a knot of unease in my stomach. Being alone at the front definitely didn't help my nerves. I knew that because of how people usually looked at me. I had to be extra careful, but I didn't want to call my parents and prove them right. I didn't want to prove the world was a dangerous place for me. I wanted to finish my shift and show I was reliable. I spent the next 20 minutes cleaning the counters and organizing the displays. At some point, I happened to look up. My heart nearly stopped. Standing right outside the main glass entrance was that same man. He was dressed entirely in black, and because it was so dark outside, he looked like a shadow. He was pressed against the glass. By the time I fully recognized him, he had already started walking away. I wondered how long he had been standing there, just watching me work through the window. I walked up to the glass doors to see where he went, but the guy was gone. The eerie way he kept appearing made my skin crawl. I thought about calling my dad, but I didn't want to worry him. I didn't want him to worry over a suspicious stranger. I was still new to this job and wanted to prove I could handle myself. I stayed on high alert for the next hour, staring at the rain-slicked lot. But as time passed and no one else came in, my focus started to slip. I was on my phone for a while until I heard a couple of sharp metallic creaks coming from the very back of the building. They were near the loading docks. I stood up and walked toward the back, straining to hear over the rain. I could hear a distinct shuffling sound, like heavy objects being dragged. I realized someone was back there who shouldn't be, and I knew I needed to leave. I turned and moved as quietly as possible toward the front sliding doors to get out and call for help. But when I pushed against the door, it wouldn't move. I looked down through the glass and felt a surge of pure terror. A heavy-duty chain had been looped through the exterior handles and padlocked shut. I realized this was what the man had been doing when I saw him standing outside earlier. He had been trapping me. With the front doors chained, there was only one other way out, the back exit. I began to step toward the back of the store, my heart drumming so loudly I was afraid he would hear it. The shuffling sounds were still happening, but they were careful. When I reached the edge of the storage room and peered inside, I saw him. His back was to me, and he was crouched near the emergency exit. He was frantically trying to wind a thick nylon rope. He was trying to tie the crash bar of the door shut from the inside. This was my only chance. I didn't think. I just ran. I sprinted toward the door with every bit of strength I had. The man heard my footsteps and spun around. He lunged for me, but I reached the door first. I threw my weight against the handle. Because he hadn't finished securing the rope, the knot slipped. The door flew open and I stumbled out into the freezing rain. The man followed me out, but once he realized we were outside and the alarm was blaring, he turned and sprinted toward the woods. I made it to my car, locked the doors, and called my dad and the police. When they arrived, they found the chain on the front doors and the rope by the back exit. It was clear he had intended to trap me inside the dark store with him. His intentions were likely horrifying. And replaying the night back, I realized how close I came to a situation with no escape. My parents were terrified, and while their protectiveness has only increased, I can't blame them as much anymore. I learned that night that being independent doesn't mean ignoring your instincts, especially when you know the attention you attract.
This happened roughly 3 years ago, well before the pandemic, while I was still a university student. I had returned to my hometown, just before the start of my summer term. My old high school friends and I decided to organize a large group hangout. It was wonderful to reconnect with everyone, and the night itself turned out to be excellent. We started at our favorite local pub and eventually migrated to the town's only nightclub. Afterward, we picked up some food from the takeaway shop across the street. We stood on the pavement, debating whether or not to call a taxi. My friend was firmly against the idea. She insisted that she didn't want to spend the extra money, especially since we had already spent quite a lot throughout the night, buying rounds of drinks. We both lived on the outskirts of the town center, in a more rural area, near our old high school, and our houses were only a 15-minute walk from each other. Because of the proximity, I eventually agreed to walk with her, while the rest of the group huddled together to wait for their taxis. We told the group our plan, and they immediately tried to talk us out of it. They warned us that it was dangerous to be out that late, which was exactly the kind of thing my parents would have said. At the time, I just laughed off their concerns. Our town had a bit of a reputation for being a mess, but it never felt truly dangerous to me. At worst, I figured we might deal with some catcalling. From a teenager in a cheap car down by the council estate, we set off on our way, eating our food. We laughed at the various photos we had captured on Snapchat throughout the evening. I was admittedly a bit drunk, and the weather was freezing. Neither of us had dressed appropriately for the low temperature, so we hurried along. Eventually, we reached the turn-off from my friend's street. She told me to make sure I messaged her the second I got home to let her know I was safe. I promised her I would do exactly that and continued on my way alone. It was a very quiet night, and I felt perfectly safe. Walking down the main road, the street was well lit, and the area was well populated. A few cars drove past me. I felt a sense of satisfaction that I hadn't wasted money on a taxi. The crisp, fresh air was actually helping to sober me up a bit. However, when I was only about 5 minutes away from my front door, I heard the very distinct clicking sound of a bicycle approaching from behind. I didn't think much of it at first, assuming it was just a local lad, or perhaps someone cycling home after a late shift at work. But as I passed the corner shop near my house, which was closed for the night, I heard the sound of heavy panting. I turned my head and saw the silhouette of a middle-aged man wobbling haphazardly on his bike, heading directly toward me. I tried to brush it off, assuming he was either very drunk or under the influence of something. I moved to the edge of the pavement, to give him plenty of room to pass. Instead of cycling by, he steered right up to me and came to a halt. In a slurred voice, while hunching over his handlebars, he asked if we could go home. I was completely unsure of how to handle the situation. Dealing with drunks or people on drugs is one thing in a crowded club, surrounded by your friends, but it is a completely different experience when you are alone at 3 a.m. I was facing a very intoxicated man who could easily overpower me if he decided to. I responded with confusion, telling him I didn't understand what he meant. He continued to slur, calling me sis, claiming that our mother would be angry if we missed tea. The man then leaned forward and made an attempt to grab my hand. Now that he was closer, I could see just how intoxicated he really was. His eyes were completely unfocused and pointing in different directions. It was honestly a miracle that he was still able to stay upright. On the bicycle, I stepped back in a state of growing panic and instinctively reached into my skirt pocket for my keys. It was a self-defense trick I had learned during my first week at university, balling your fist around the keys, so they stick out between your fingers like a claw. I told him firmly that I was not his sister. He just blinked at me, swaying dangerously in his seat. He called out the name Julie, and told me again that it was time to go home. For the record, my name is not Julie. This man looked like he could be older than my father, and I had never seen him before in my life. He looked like the standard creepy guy at a pub that most women know to instinctively avoid. Trying to keep the situation from escalating, I put on a polite smile. I remembered from growing up around pubs that being friendly but direct is often the best way to manage people in that state. I told him he should probably head home. because he'd clearly had a bit too much to drink. I even used his own logic against him, smiling and telling him to get going so he wouldn't miss his tea. Internally, I was terrified. My fingers felt like they were losing circulation because I was gripping my keys so tightly. After a long moment of confused silence, he finally began to cycle unsteadily away from me. I stood there, completely frozen, feeling my heart hammering against my ribs as I watched him slowly pedal up the slight incline of the street toward the council estate at the top of the hill. Just when I thought I was in the clear, he stopped again. He was positioned almost at the entrance of my specific street, and he turned around to stare back down at me. My heart felt like it was going to burst from the sheer terror of the moment. Thinking quickly, I grabbed my phone and began walking back in the direction I had just come from. I immediately called my friend, the one I had parted ways with only minutes before. Thankfully, she picked up after only 2 rings. I quietly begged her to stay on the line with me as I stumbled back toward the shop. While she was panicking on the other end of the phone and asking what was happening, I stole a glance over my shoulder. I saw the man's wobbling figure finally disappear into the estate at the top of the hill. A massive wave of relief washed over me. I explained everything to my friend. As I turned back around and headed toward my street, keeping my eyes locked on the dark corner where the man had vanished, I realized now that I was lucky. The man was likely just very confused and drunk rather than malicious. However, I know things could have ended very differently. Since that night, I never take the risk of walking alone. I always take a taxi or make sure a male friend walks me all the way to my door. My boyfriend and I were driving home from Universal Studios, Florida, in Orlando, late last night. We ended up on a route we had never taken before, which led us deep into a desolate area that felt like the middle of nowhere. His car has a broken speedometer, so he relies on the odometer to track his fuel. He has to manually reset the miles after every trip to the pump. This detail became a major source of stress when we noticed we had hit the 130-mile mark. We were traveling down a completely deserted road, without another soul in sight. We were running low on fuel, but there were no gas stations visible anywhere in the darkness. I searched for the nearest station on my phone, and we headed toward one, only to find it was closed. Feeling the pressure, we located another station about 5 minutes away. As we pulled back onto the empty road, things started to get strange. My boyfriend believed he had secured the gas cap, but we suddenly heard a loud bang. He realized he had left the cap off, so he pulled over onto the dark shoulder to search for it. Miraculously, he discovered the cap was still somehow attached to the car. We got back on our way toward the next station, but I was suddenly overcome by a horrible, intrusive thought that something was going to go wrong there. I tried to ignore the feeling because we were stuck with no other options. It wouldn't have been able to reach us in such a remote spot. When we arrived at the station, the lights were only partially on. The road ended there in a dead end, meaning the only way out was to turn left or go back the way we came. My boyfriend stepped out of the car to check the pumps, and at that moment, my sense of dread intensified to a level I had never experienced. Even though I have survived dangerous situations in the past, including being followed and witnessing tragic accidents, this felt different. My stomach dropped completely. Suddenly, a white car appeared on the empty road, pulling up to the intersection. The driver noticed my boyfriend, then backed up slowly with his windows rolled down. Seeing him watch my boyfriend and his sports car sent me into a total panic. I began screaming my boyfriend's name as loud as I could. When the man realized I was also in the car, he quickly turned left and sped away into the night. It was too dark to catch his license plate. The experience was more frightening than words can describe. I was terrified that I was about to watch my boyfriend get robbed or worse, especially since my intuition had warned me just minutes before. We eventually found a busier station with other people around, and made it home safely. Later, my dad mentioned that the specific road we were on is notorious for being a place where bodies are frequently discovered. I truly hope no one else ever finds themselves in that position, and I hope the man who was watching us never gets the chance to hurt anyone.
In July of 1996, 24 years ago, I reached the end of my term of service with the Army. I was stationed at Fort Hood, Texas, and I made the firm decision that, at the stroke of midnight, I would complete my out-processing and begin the long drive back home to Wisconsin. For the entire duration of that day, I was so filled with an intense, restless anxiety about leaving that I found it nearly impossible to get any rest. When 11:45 p.m. finally arrived, I climbed out of bed and headed over to sign out with the desk sergeant. Naturally, knowing that a crowd of people wanted to sign out at the exact same midnight hour, the sergeant decided that was the perfect time for him to go out and perform his rounds. I was stuck in a bureaucratic holding pattern because, according to regulations, I could not leave until I received my final sign-off from him and physically turned in my room key. I waited, and then I waited some more. It was 2:45 a.m. when he finally returned to his desk. I turned in my key, secured the necessary sign-off, and by 3:30, I was finally on my way. At the start of the drive, I was fueled by so much raw adrenaline that I felt I could easily drive for days without stopping. Unfortunately, that surge of energy was fleeting. By the time I was pushing through the traffic around Dallas, I was nodding off at the wheel. I decided that just past the city of Denton, I would pull over at the next rest stop to take a quick nap until the sun came up. I was struggling immensely to keep my eyes open by the time I reached a stop. I pulled over, got out of my car to stretch, get some fresh air and throw away some trash, all while taking a look at my immediate surrounding. There were only about 3 other cars and 2 semi-trucks scattered in the lot. It was a picnic stop rather than a formal rest area, which meant there were no restrooms. I tossed my trash into a bin and glanced at a posted flyer featuring a few missing persons, though I admit I didn't pay any real attention to the details on it. I walked back to my car, which was a basic no-frills Geo Metro. It was a stripped-down model, no radio, no power windows, and no power locks. I cracked the windows, turned on the portable boombox I had brought for music, and lay down to get some sleep. I had only been asleep for maybe 5 or 10 minutes when I felt my car shake just slightly. I cracked one eye open and looked around, but I did not see anything, so I dismissed it and went back to sleep. A moment later, I heard the distinct sound of my door handle being pulled and heard scratching on the door keyhole. I sat up quickly, but I did not see anyone there. I scanned all the windows and saw no one, so I shrugged it off as the product of being exhausted and laid back down, turning the radio up a bit louder. Being a Texas night in July, it was stiflingly hot, but I was so tired that I simply lay back down and tried to rest. A few minutes later, I heard the door handle being tested again, and this time, the car shook significantly. I sat up fast and saw a man standing at the passenger side looking directly in. Even though it was hot and humid, he was wearing a red sweatshirt with the hood pulled up, and I could not see his face. Because I was young, stubborn, and just out of the military, I yelled at him, demanding to know what he wanted. He just stared at me blankly, and I climbed out of the car. I am only 5'6", but I was absolutely livid. He simply turned and walked off toward the picnic tables as if nothing had happened. All the while, I was yelling at him that if he came back, I would take him out. I decided I would just drive on from there, so I got back in and continued on my way. Even though I was quite upset, only about 10 miles down the road, I was dangerously tired again. Luckily, about 10 miles further down I-35, there was another picnic stop. I was not sure why North Texas didn't have actual rest areas, but they didn't. I pulled into the second picnic stop and backed into a parking spot just in case I needed to leave quickly. For some reason, there was only one other car there and no semi-trucks. I locked the doors again, cracked the windows, and turned on my boombox. I fell asleep instantly. About 30 minutes later, I heard a loud thud on my driver's side window. I jumped up and looked around, but no one was there. I got out of the car, which was quite stupid, but I had my macho military attitude going. Still, no one was around. I assumed it was just my nerves from the previous stop. I got back into my car, locked the doors again, and closed my eyes. This time, I was too amped up to fall asleep, so I just lay there with my eyes closed. I felt that someone was looking at me. I opened my eyes and saw the same guy standing there again in the red sweatshirt, hood up. I could not see his eyes, but I could see that he was smiling at me. I popped up quickly and tried to open the door to bump him with it. Being a cheap Geo, since the doors were locked, it didn't open. He walked backward, still staring at me. By the time I got out, he was about 30 feet away, facing me. It was fairly dark, but as I looked him over, I could see he was really skinny and about 6'2" or 6'3". I still felt like I could take him with my military experience. He was wearing the red hooded sweatshirt, blue jeans, and green tennis shoes. For some reason, I thought the shoes looked odd. I could see something shine every now and then as he stood there staring at me, and I honestly believe it was a machete. I quickly reached into my back seat, grabbed my baseball bat, and started yelling at him to come get some. I am not really sure why I said that. He started walking toward me, and I took a few steps toward him, not really thinking. As I got about 5 feet away from my car, and he was now about 15 feet from me, a yellow van pulled up quickly and parked just off to the side of the road. I finally realized what was happening, and I saw 2 other guys also wearing hooded sweatshirts in the van. Before they could get out, I ran back to my car. I had left the keys in the ignition. Since I had backed in, I was able to cut the wheel hard to the right and peel my car out of there. I was so lucky that, being a manual transmission, I didn't stall the car because the other 2 guys were already out of the van, and the first guy was just about at my car. I jumped back on the interstate and didn't stop until I was about 20 miles into Oklahoma. I stopped for gas and to use the restroom. Inside, I noticed that same flyer I had barely glanced at the first picnic stop. It was a flyer with several missing persons on it, warning people not to stop for long periods of time at the rest areas. It described a possible suspect as being roughly 6 feet tall, wearing blue jeans, green shoes, and a red hooded sweatshirt. I completely went white. Needless to say, since it was daylight, I drove the rest of the way to Wisconsin, wide awake. I am not sure why, but I never reported it to the number on the flyer or told anyone about it. But now I live in North Texas and pass those 2 picnic stops every day on my way to work, and I think about that night quite often.
I prefer not to get too specific with the details here, but I am sure you will understand why being a bit paranoid is the wise choice by the time I finish this account. I have been into urban exploring, or urbex, as it is commonly called now, for as long as I can remember. This interest likely stems from being an extreme introvert. While other children were playing together on jungle gyms and swing sets, I preferred being off on my own, exploring some hidden corner of the park or whatever area we happened to be in at the time. By the time I reached my teenage years, I was targeting larger and more significant locations. On weekends, I would travel across town on my bike to tag derelict buildings with spray paint. In my 20s, I began traveling across the Northeast to visit classic locations as well as lesser-known abandoned spots that had not been scouted out very well by others in the community. Despite my travels, I had 2 or 3 favorite haunts in my hometown that I would visit once or twice a year just to see how they were progressing. In reality, they were regressing. But the point remains. These buildings would accumulate filth, become homes for various animals, or occasionally house people. Graffiti artists would come and go, and there was something truly nice about watching these structures age over time. Of all the places where I thought I might come close to losing my life, it certainly was not in these local spots. I knew them like the back of my hand, and they were my favorites because they felt relatively safe. However, the story takes a turn from there. I was wandering around a large old industrial complex, marveling at how nature was slowly reclaiming the land, one cracked paving slab at a time. Eventually, I stopped to eat some sandwiches I had packed, sitting in the office of an old factory that overlooked the main shop floor. All the glass had been smashed out, and I sat in a filthy old chair trying to eat as cleanly as possible. Suddenly, I began to hear voices. At first, I worried that it might be security or the police. I did not think the place had any active cameras or that I had been spotted by anyone on duty, and I felt angry at myself for being careless. As the voices grew louder, I realized they did not sound like police at all, but they were definitely headed into the same building. I wondered what they were doing there, and unfortunately, I soon found out. The men began discussing a situation that sounded like bad news. One man explained that someone had been caught with 12 kilograms of product and was likely going to inform on the group. A second man suggested they could deal with him in county jail, but the real problem was the names he might drop before then, which could lead back to them. The first man questioned if they even knew who had been named, arguing that they could not simply eliminate 6 people on the assumption that they would all turn state's evidence. The second man insisted they had no choice, and a third man agreed, noting that there was almost $500,000 at stake. He stated they could not afford to take chances and that everyone involved had to go. The first man was shocked, asking if they were truly going to kill 6 of their own people. The third man firmly repeated his order to get it done and to eliminate anyone who had knowledge of the situation. I could not believe what I was hearing. It was some kind of murderous criminal conspiracy, likely over drugs or other illegal imports, happening just meters away from me. At that moment, I tried to think of the worst thing that could possibly happen. Aside from a catastrophic natural disaster, the one thing you would never want to happen in that situation is for your phone to suddenly go off. Just as the men were about to leave, I received a call. I did not even see who was calling. I simply mashed the volume button to silence the ringtone. Immediately, I heard one of them demand to know who was there, followed by the sound of running. I ran harder and faster than I ever had in my life. If I had not known the layout of the complex so perfectly, I might not be here to tell this story today. I was so terrified that I did not even go home that night. Instead, I went to another one of my favorite abandoned spots and stayed there until morning. I only left when I was absolutely certain that I was not being followed. Looking back, I do not think they saw my face, and they probably assumed I was an undercover officer. Nothing ever came of the incident, and since I had no idea who the men were, I could not follow their case in the news. It was the scariest thing that ever happened to me while urban exploring, and it taught me to always expect the unexpected.
I was new to America. I moved from a place here and I had no idea where I can get things for a new accommodation that I was provided with the home and a transport to take me to one place to the other. I was from a very small town in Wales, and to be in such a big city was a new one for me. New experiences, new adventures, and new people I got to visit. Being in the city was very transforming for me, as the transitions were tough being from the small town and all. And then, things became quite easier than before. The city was something that I was getting used to. I got the job in the Target corporate office, and I had to move all the way to America for the job that I was in San Francisco now for the job. It was a boring job, so telling the details of the job is a snooze fest in itself that no one should go through. But that is not why I chose the job. I did not choose the job because it was boring, but I took the job because it was a great opportunity to be overseas and to meet with new people and make friends with them and learn the American way of doing things. And it paid really well, so there's nothing bad with being paid good and to be in a country where there are quite a lot of opportunities. I moved to the corporate, and as per the requirement of the job, I had to get to one of the Target stores to operate well and inspect where they were lacking. It was mostly a mix of hands-on involvement and bit of paperwork to be taken care of. So I went inside this Target. It was already 6 in the evening, and I was already late due to the flight. It was a completely different state that I was in, so I marched in. And as I got close, I saw the physical condition of the store wasn't very good. The Target side wasn't completely working, and the store wasn't really maintained, and on the outside there was a group of guys that just kept hanging around. That seemed to be one of the reasons too that the store wasn't really performing. I called in the manager and asked him why are the guys on the outside just hanging around? They are blocking the potential customers, scaring them away from the store, and I told him to tell them to scram away from there. The manager didn't really listen at first, but then I also informed him about the other things. I told him that this is his responsibility to call the corporate office to come and surface the sign. And then when I asked him, I told you to get those boys to get away from the property. Tell them that they cannot hang around the property. They are scaring the customers away. And if there is something of a problem here, let me know. I will put on some sense in them. The man looked at me and then said, "Okay, I will tell them to go away." And I replied, "Don't tell them to just go away. Tell them they are not to come here and assemble. If they want to buy something, come right in and buy and leave. Don't gather." And I left to check some other things. And then 10 minutes into my inspection, I saw that there was a nuance created. A ruckus was going on outside the house. And I asked them what is going on. And one of the employees came running and said, "Sir, it is the manager. They are beating the manager." I quickly left my paperwork in my bag at the very aisle that I was standing at and inspecting, and ran towards the door and out in the area where the boys were hanging, and they were grabbing the manager by the collar and punching him. I got out and I heard one of the tall boys with blackened hair with an evil smile say, "Something's right," to the manager's face. "You don't tell us nothing. Tell whoever shrimp you are working for we are not moving anywhere." And as I got outside, the manager looked at me while he was getting his head bashed in and pointed the finger at me and said in a broken, beaten voice, "Sir, you tell them to go away. I guess they are not really listening to what I have to say." And then I looked at him, seeing him all beaten on the floor. "Hey man, I'm just a tourist. Why are you bringing me in a fight that has nothing to do with me?" And I could see the anger and disappointment in the eyes of the manager at that time. Well, this was the corporate America. Everyone had to protect their own ass. So that is exactly what I was doing, or seemed like I was doing. The fight broke off. The manager only got bruises, nothing was broken, so that was a good start for him. He was really pissed at me for not taking a stand, but I got him a medical grant that the corporate gave in case anybody got injured during work. It was a whopping 50 grand, and he received, and I told him the very reason I did not interfere was to make his case strong. But you see, that is not just the case that I was transferred from Wales to America. I was not the corporate suck-up that I was pretending to be. I was so much more than that. That night, when those idiots beat up our store manager, we were able to gather the information on those hooligans. My line of work involves intimidation, and my job was to make sure that the people who were supposed to be scared of the power of the target were scared of it. I was keeping the accounts on them. So the boys that seemed not very afraid of that manager and Target had to get the taste of what power Target has. And I was the guy that's sent to rough up guys like them. That same night, I went into their houses and made sure they remember what it feels like to mess with the wrong company, and they were quick to understand. So other than the boring paperwork, there was something else that I brought in from all the way in Wales. I was the accountant that people hoped that they didn't see. I worked at Target in around 2010. It was a cool job. All I had to do was sit around, do the paperwork, and other things people do. I was the manager at the Target, and I got hooked up as a manager because my cousin had a good relation with the store owner. I was around 25 when I got the job, and I had no experience prior, so getting that job was a privilege, and I very well knew it. So I was one of those managers who worked too much, even though there was less physical work to do, but I was knee-deep in all the paperwork. The thing with Target is that it is a big store, and the thing with big stores is that it comes with a large number of annoying people. Target is a big store, and a day don't go by that there's not some lady or middle-aged man flipping out over the products. It was one headache that we constantly had to go through, and even though we were not allowed to really be aggressive to customers, there are times when you want to do things to them that you cannot really do. But there isn't much you can do than just sit and listen and solve whatever issue they're having. It is tough, but it is something that we have to do in order to make it better. One day, things were very hectic at the store, and it was then that things got out of hand with one of the customers. Things were as usual as they always were, and the store was busy. The chaos was being managed just fine, and when we thought things cannot be weirder, they did, spiraling into a chaotic shitfest when suddenly an angry customer wanted a refund. And we told him about the refund policy, but he just won't admit that he was at the wrong one here, and we had no choice but to call in security. He wanted to talk to me, and I told him there was no way that we could do anything about the thing, and he was quite aggressive about it and demanded to see me. I got out, and then he told me, "You better give me my refund or it's going to be really bad for you. I will make sure you shit bricks for the rest of your lives." I looked at him and I said, "Sir, our refund policy is a bit different, and the product you brought in has been used like multiple times. We cannot really refund you your money, but if you want us to replace your product, we can happily do that." And the man looked furious and said, "I want my money, dumb bitch." And I told him that it cannot possibly be done. He told me that he will come back for me and teach me a lesson. Now, it wasn't the first time that I was being told that my life is in danger, but then it wasn't the first time that someone said that they will kill me. But this time, the man was bigger than anyone I have seen, and his eyes were red as the sky during sunset. He was accompanied out of the store by the police. I wasn't really scared by the man. More like this time it felt like it was more real than before. And this time, it felt like the warnings were somehow real. As the police accompanied him away from the store, I could see his red eyes filled with anger and hate looking right at me, as if he wants to kill me. I called in the inspector in the evening asking whether the man was released from the prison, and the policeman said, "We had nothing against him. He did not really commit a crime, he was just being an asshole. We don't really put people in jail if they are assholes." I said, "He wanted to kill me. I think you should have kept him in the prison." The policeman replied with a chuckle. He was probably coked out of his mind. He probably doesn't remember you, and secondly, if he does, don't worry. We will arrest him before he kills you. Now, the way he talked all sarcastic and wise-ass, I didn't think that the police will be much help when the guy comes in and tries to kill me in the store. I was slowly getting paranoid by all of it. There was something about the rage in this guy, and I could see. I was having flashbacks of his eyes with volcanic anger. I was scared for my life. Moreover, I was scared, what if he finds out where I live? It will be so much easier for him to just come in and strangle me while I was vulnerable. I wasn't sure about this guy, and he was easily in my head this time completely. I made sure that I am not being followed. The first thing I did was buy a taser. I did not want to be defenseless if he approaches me. I wasn't the one to be fooled around with. I was thinking of buying a gun before, but that would be too irrational of a response. Now that I think of it, every response that I had was irresponsible. I remember having a nightmare about the guy confronting me in the parking and killing me. It's like never before. It was the Monday morning, and all my weekend had been spent thinking about what if the man confronts me? What will I do, and how will I defend myself? So I was a bit cranky and anxious the Monday morning into work. I stepped out of my car where it was parked and went about my day. The day went calm and easy, and there was no angry man spotted, and surprisingly, the Monday went by easy. There was no confrontation this Monday, and things went smooth, so I was a bit relaxed, and there was no sign of that big man anywhere. And then, as I was moving to the parking lot as the day was ending, and I was getting back after closing in the shop and getting done with all the accounts and paperwork, I saw the light flickering the parking, and it was just me and the other car in the parking lot. I did not know who it was. I looked at it, and I was a bit nervous, and there was this eerie feeling that I had that something wrong is about to happen. And then I slowly approached my bag and took the taser in my hand. I had that feeling that somebody was standing over me. I looked back, and I saw the same old man standing tall right behind me, and before he can do or say anything, I reacted with the fight or flight reaction, but instead of running, I stood my ground and I tased him, and as I tased him, he fell. And as he was getting down, I could see the flowers dropping out of his hands, and I was realizing that I had acted too fast. I saw the man picking up, trying to get back to his senses, and then looked at me and said, "Well, fair enough. I guess we are even. I'm sorry for my behavior earlier. I apologize." And then handed me the flower, and told me to give it to the staff. And I asked him if he's alright, and apologized for tasing him. Well, good thing I am not worried about him killing me anymore, for he knows that the tables can turn on him too.
In that moment on the verge of death, it's true what they say. Your life flashes before your eyes. It's like rewatching a TV series, but you're the star. As poor as a church mouse, I never had much ambition. I was content with part-time jobs that paid just enough for me to scrape by. But then I got married. I still don't know how I managed to save enough money for the big day. I thought that would be it, that life would return to normal. Now I see how wrong I was. A week into my marriage, I finally understood why all my married friends were so fixated on earning more. With a new wife and no savings, I was filled with shame. I never thought I would regret getting married just a few days in. But there I was, questioning why I had said yes. My friend helped me get a job at Target, but the only shift available started at 5 in the morning. I'm not a morning person. I prefer to sleep until noon, but that wasn't an option anymore. The pay wasn't great, but it wasn't terrible either. I had no complaints until I realized the true necessity for more income. After 3 months of marriage, I felt exhausted, as if I had been married for 30 years. I kept wondering why I had agreed to the wedding. I admit I regretted not working harder and saving money earlier. My wife Charlotte never said anything about our financial situation, and that made me feel even worse. I tried to show her more physical affection, but for someone as dirt poor as me, it felt like a mistake. 2 months later, I came home to a surprise. Charlotte was pregnant. She was so happy, so I pretended to be happy too. But that night, I couldn't sleep. I just kept thinking about how many more jobs I would need. My worry grew with each passing day. I was ready to do anything to provide for my family, but with no proper education, there was only so much I could do. The money from my current job helped, but I knew the expenses would multiply 5 times after the baby was born. One night, I didn't want to go home. The urge to run away from everything was overwhelming. I decided to go to a bar to have a drink to calm my nerves. I stared at the glass of beer, thinking about the cost. Then I heard someone call my name. I turned my head and saw a muscular man smiling at me. I immediately wondered if he was gay, but that wasn't the case. He asked me if I had money problems, and I wondered if he was psychic. He wasn't. He showed me a tiny pouch and said, "These babies can earn you some real good money." The man was a drug dealer. I didn't want to get involved, but when he explained how much he earned just by handing out a few pouches a week, I couldn't find a reason to say no. He gave me a burner phone and a few packets for the first week, telling me I would get calls on the phone for deliveries. At first I was terrified, still unsure, but a month passed and I was earning enough to buy everything our baby would need. I was even able to fill the refrigerator with food for Charlotte's pregnancy craving. One day, Charlotte asked me where all the money was coming from. She was suspicious after I brought home an expensive crib for our baby. I lied and told her my pay at Target had increased, and I had a new, well-paying part-time job. I'm not sure if she believed me, but she never asked again. I kept lying to avoid suspicion, and despite my desire to quit my job, I continued to work there. That day, I got a call early in the morning for a delivery at 6. My shift started at 5, so I put the packet in my pocket and went to work. I was anxious, and my coworkers noticed, but I ignored their questions. 5 minutes early, I got another call. After asking for a bathroom break, I hurried out. When I got to the man, I couldn't find the packet. I remembered I'd put it in the same pocket as my cell phone and might have dropped it. I asked the man to wait and ran back. When I got there, I saw the packet in the hands of my manager. A coworker named Sam had picked it up and told the manager. I couldn't get it back and was fired on the spot. I didn't want to get the police involved, so I quietly left, but I was furious. I kept cursing Sam for not minding his own business and just returning the packet to me. The burner phone in my pocket started ringing incessantly, annoying me. I didn't answer. I planned to go home and get another packet from my hiding place. While crossing the street, still cursing my coworkers, my phone rang again. I was so caught up in my thoughts that I didn't see the car coming towards me. Without warning, I felt a sudden jolt of energy as I was thrown into the air. In those slow motion moments in the air, I saw the white car, and then I hit the ground. I heard my bones cracking, followed by a wave of pain. Everything started to get fuzzy, and I could feel warm blood gushing from my body. It took me a few moments to realize I was possibly dying. I don't know if the car stopped, or if the driver came to my side. All I know is that darkness was spreading, and as I lost consciousness, every moment of my life flashed before me. My past failures, my pregnant wife, my unborn child. Who would protect them now? It was my fault from the very beginning. I should never have taken the easy way out. I should have worked harder from the start. It's a lesson I've learned and one I will try to improve upon, if I'm still alive after this. Target was my favorite store, but I don't think I can ever go back. A terrible experience can ruin your love for a place, and that's what happened to me. It all started after I graduated college. I was a psychology major and struggled to find a job. The only psychology job I could find wanted 10 years of experience. I had to take whatever job I could get. I ended up working at some funky call center. It was a complete dumpster fire every single day. The managers had no idea what was going on. My co-workers were some of the weirdest people I'd ever seen. Most didn't have a college education, which made me feel really bad about myself. I had low confidence and felt like a failure. I still lived with my parents and had massive student debt. I was working at a call center, making minimum wage. I had also let myself go during my last few months of senior year. I was really stressed out trying to pass. I just didn't have time to make salad or go for runs anymore. I was feeling really down for a bit, and this is where James comes in. He was a really weird guy that worked at the call center too. He had a goofy looking mustache and was a bit of a creep. I saw him checking me out a few times. I even saw him look at other girls too. A little pervy, but I couldn't expect anything less from a place like this. Oddly enough, James was the only guy who was ever nice to me. Everyone else was so miserable to be there. James had been hired a couple of weeks before I got the job. I guess it just didn't have enough time to make us completely miserable yet. There was one time when I went out for a smoke break. James joined me and started flirting. He definitely had his problems, but there was something about getting a little attention that made me feel special. I was always a very introverted person and hadn't had a boyfriend in over 2 years. It felt nice to be noticed. Soon we exchanged numbers and started talking outside of work. There were a few weeks there that I kept trying to get him to shave his mustache. I told him he would look a lot better. It took about 3 weeks to finally get through to him. When he did, I was surprised. He was actually a really handsome guy under that caterpillar. That's when I made up my mind. If he made a move on me, I wasn't gonna say no. He never made a move on me though. I was surprised because I was sending some pretty strong signals for him to do so. He just never did, not even over text messages. All he would ever do was flirt. It wasn't long into that situation that I gave up on him. I figured he didn't like me. I mean, honestly, what else was I supposed to think? I downloaded Tinder like everyone else. I knew my situation was bad, and I secretly fantasized about hooking up with some rich guy. I didn't find a buff millionaire, but I did find a really nice guy. We went on a few dates and started going out together regularly. I really liked him. We're still together, by the way. But this is where things got weird with James. He started acting differently. He started doing more and more inappropriate things. I was friends with James on Facebook. When I changed my status to in a relationship, he put an angry face emoji. I remember seeing it and rolling my eyes. Typical man, I thought. They don't want you until you have someone else. Something James would always do with me is send slightly naked pictures. It wasn't like full frontal or anything like that, but he would take racy photos of himself getting out of the shower or changing. I was okay with it when I was single, but he just didn't stop. These new pictures were much more revealing, if you know what I mean. I kept telling him that I was in a relationship and he couldn't do this anymore. He just wouldn't listen. He always said that he forgot. I knew he was doing it intentionally. Things also got really awkward at work. There were quite a few things that he would do that were just freaky. For example, pens started disappearing from my desk. I didn't think anything of it at first. I just thought I was being clumsy. But one day I happened to walk by James's desk. I noticed all of my pens there. He also followed me outside every time I went on a smoke break. He always played it off like he wasn't doing anything, but it was so obvious to everyone. It was around the 6-month mark of me working at that funky call center. I had my performance review and got a raise. I got an extra $1 an hour, which I was pretty happy about. I had a few $100s in savings. I decided to treat myself to my favorite store, Target. I remember making a self-congratulatory post on Facebook about it. I even mentioned that I was going to treat myself to some new sheets from Target. I remember getting comments from some of my friends and former classmates. They all congratulated me. I was really excited. Sure, I had a stupid job, but I was making the best of my situation. I remember getting to Target at about 6 or 7 on a Friday night. I went alone. I walked into the store and went over to the bedding aisle. I really wanted to pick out the best sheets for me. I'm a little OCD about fabric and how things feel, so I was running my hands across the sheets to find the one that I liked the best. That was when something unexpected happened. I felt a kiss on my neck. I had been so wrapped up in feeling sheets that I didn't even notice who was behind me. I immediately thought it was my boyfriend. I mean, who else would randomly kiss me in public, right? Well, you guessed it. It was James. I turned around after he kissed me. I was smiling, but my giddiness turned to disgust when I saw that it was him. My stomach dropped. I wanted to scream, but I just couldn't bring myself to do anything. I was more in shock than anything else. I know I must have looked so repulsed, but that didn't stop him. He pinned me up against the aisle rack and continued to kiss me. He shoved his entire tongue down my throat. It was honestly disgusting. This probably went on for about 3 or 4 seconds. Then I finally snapped out of it. I pulled my head away and slapped him across the face as hard as I could. I told him that I never wanted to see him again. I fell down onto my back, and I just sat there telling him to please leave me alone. He stood there, though, looking down at me, smiling. James was a really freaky guy. He started getting on top of me and kissing me again. That was when I finally screamed at the top of my lungs. Someone who must have been in an aisle over or two overheard and came running. He was a man who looked like he was in his 30s. He ripped James off of me and threw him against the wall. After that, James took off. The man was really nice to me. He helped me up and made sure I was okay. He asked if I wanted to call the police. I was so shocked I just told him no in the moment. That wouldn't be the last time that I saw James. We still work at the same call center. My God, it's pretty awkward. I know he still creeps on my Facebook and he looks at me all the time. I'm honestly not sure what to do about it. I haven't even told my boyfriend about what happened. Honestly, I'm kind of afraid to. But I seriously might have to one of these days. I used to work at a place called O'Hurley's General Store in Shepherdston, West Virginia. It was the kind of place that seemed older than time itself. The kind of store where you could buy anything from nails and lanterns to groceries, whiskey, or a second-hand pocket watch. The job wasn't glamorous, but it offered reliable pay, and the customers were usually kind, decent people from a small town. Every now and then a drunk might make a scene when I refused to sell liquor on a Sunday, but nothing worse ever happened. At least, nothing until one night when I came face to face with someone who still makes my skin crawl whenever I think of him. It was a Saturday night, late enough for the streets outside were quiet, and I was stocking shelves and tidying up when the front bell jingled. I walked back behind the counter, ready to help whoever came in, when I first laid eyes on the man in the black jacket with a red t-shirt. His jacket was finely tailored, pressed and sharp, the kind you'd expect on a K-pop artist on a magazine cover. That alone was unusual in our little store. He looked to be around 40 years old, but his style was much younger. But everything else about him was stranger still. His skin was pale, almost sickly white, and his features were so sharp and severe that they hardly looked real. His silver hair, which was clearly dyed, he had the look of someone who belonged anywhere but here. He asked for lighter fluid, and I fetched it for him while trying to make a bit of small talk. He said he was from D.C., just passing through. He hinted that he was involved in politics, though he didn't really say what exactly. His words were vague, and his smile was wolfish, like he knew more than he would ever tell. When it came time to pay, he pulled out a roll of bills that must have been thicker than my fist. All hundreds as far as I could see. He peeled one off and laid it on the counter. I gave him his change and made a joke about how if business hadn't been so good earlier, I wouldn't have had enough to cover it. He didn't so much as crack a smile. Instead, he pulled out a silver-plated Zippo lighter, the fanciest I had ever seen, and began filling it with the fluid right there at the counter. I expected him to light a cigarette, but when I mentioned it, he said he didn't smoke. As soon as he finished filling the lighter, a few drops spilled onto his finger. He raised it to his lips and sucked the liquid off like it was nothing. I recoiled without meaning to, startled by the sight of a grown man sipping lighter fluid as though it was sweet tea. He noticed my reaction, grinned wider, and seemed to enjoy the way it unsettled me. Before I could gather the courage to ask him what he was doing, the bell over the door rang again. This time it was a girl, no older than 14. The strangest part was the way she dressed. Her denim skirt had embroidered white flowers, and her shirt looked like something a much younger child would wear. She called him Daddy and asked if there was a bathroom. The man looked at me, and I gave him the key to the store's restroom. Instead of passing it to her directly, he pulled a small black leather wallet from his jacket, placed the lighter, the wallet, and the key together, and handed them all to her. She walked off and locked the bathroom door behind her. That was when a sick feeling settled in my gut. Something about the whole arrangement felt wrong. The girl didn't look anything like him. She had soft, rounded features and curly hair, nothing like his sharp face and silver hair. She was far too old to be calling her father Daddy in that childish way, and the way he handed her the wallet, along with the lighter, gnawed at me. I had a strong suspicion about what was inside, but lacked any solid proof. I tried to distract myself by asking him where they were headed next, but he turned cold. His eyes were nearly black, narrow and piercing, and when he looked at me, it was like he was staring straight through. I shifted behind the counter, nervous under his gaze. His voice stayed calm but carried a quiet warning. He reminded me of the old saying about curiosity killed the cat. He walked the aisles like a man inspecting some strange little relic of a forgotten world. I went back to tidying, though my eyes followed him, waiting for the girl to return. Minutes dragged on, 5, then 10. The bathroom door stayed shut. Just as I was about to ask if he thought she was all right, I heard the snap of the lock. She emerged slowly, not with the briskness of someone who had used the bathroom, but with the sluggish daze of someone half asleep. She handed back the key, the lighter, and the wallet, murmuring her thanks in a dreamy, heavy voice. The way she said Daddy then left no doubt in my mind that he was no father to her. It made my stomach churn, especially when I saw the look he gave her in return. It was the kind of look no man should ever give a girl, least of all one calling him father. My only goal was to see them gone. Around here, we don't usually confront someone head-on, not unless we're looking for trouble. We find ways to make our meaning clear without saying it outright. I wished them safe travels in a friendly voice, but my eyes revealed my true feelings. He looked back at me with a hunger that made me cold all over, as though he was considering whether to tear me apart then and there. He walked to the counter, laid the bathroom key down carefully, and repeated his warning about curiosity killing the cat. Then he led the girl out into the night, and moments later, their car was gone. I stood there for a long while after, unsure what to do. My first instinct was to call the sheriff, but what could I even say? A man had come into my store with a girl who looked like his daughter. That wouldn't be enough to act on. I could have mentioned the wallet, hinted at what I thought it might contain. But I had the strong impression that no matter what we accused him of, he would slip right out of it. The money he carried, the confidence in his manner, and the way he spoke told me he was untouchable. So I said nothing. I finished out my shift in silence, though his words echoed in my mind the whole time. For days afterward, I couldn't shake them. Whenever I thought back to his face, to those eyes like pits of tar, the words came back sharp and clear. Curiosity killed the cat. Even now, all these years later, the memory lingers. I can still see the shine of that silver lighter, still hear the flat tone of his voice, still picture the dazed girl with her childlike clothes and tired eyes. I sometimes wonder what became of her, whether she ever escaped whatever grip he had on her, or if she was lost the moment she called him Daddy. But the truth is, I'll never know. That night, I chose silence, and silence has a way of living with you long after the moment has passed.